The challenge is simple. I've got to dump a few boxes of spare model parts, but before I did that, I wanted to know, can a decent model be made out of spare parts left over from years of building kits? Turns out, the answer is yes. This was no cutting-edge kit build, but I had a lot of fun grafting together this Franken Corsair, and I tried a few things along the way. Let me show you how I did it. So yeah, I've been building for a while. I do my best to follow instructions and finish my entire model, but inevitably I end up with spare parts at the end of the build. Some of it is unused ordnance, some are bits that were replaced by aftermarket bits, and sometimes it just seems like I must have forgotten a couple pages in the build sequence. Thing is, I know these parts are going to be used anytime soon, but for some reason, I always feel guilty about throwing them all out. So I keep them, and I store them, and I stockpile them. Why do I do this? Is this normal? Do you do this? I mean, some of these parts are well over 15 years old, just staying in bins and boxes. Well, enough of that. This stuff has got to go. But before I junked this junk, I wanted to see if I could make a decent Corsair out of this random Corsair detritus and a junked Otaki Corsair kit. Because, let's face it, the Otaki kit is crap. But this build doesn't have to be. I started with the cockpit and the engine at the same time. The kit comes with a floor, which is very odd for an early Corsair. But this was not a worry for me, as I had the parts to cobble together a complete Tamiya cockpit. I painted these up using an interior green mix, as well as NATO black. I painted up a set of leftover fine mold seatbelts, and I added them to the seat. However, fitting the new cockpit into the fuselage was a whole other problem. That's because the kit bulkhead was too narrow, and for some reason it had a forward lean. Luckily, I had the parts left over from the Dash 1D fuselage. Grafting that on was easy because the cuts were along the panel lines. Of course, I got a little crazy with the sanding sticks and took off a wee bit too much on the left side, but that was a simple fix with some styrene strip that I wedged in. Being careful to not sand right through the part, I slowly blended the Tamiya parts onto the Otaki fuselage, and eventually I got the shape that I wanted. The vague Otaki sidewalls were sanded off, and I scratch-built these details with more styrene strip. Now, I'll admit, these aren't 100% accurate, but they're far better than what I started with. And besides, once the cockpit is all closed in, a lot of this is going to be difficult to see anyway. After that, the Tamiya cockpit was very easy to install in the fuselage, and everything fit as it should. The engine is kind of bulbous. It has a cute Mickey Mouse vibe. So yeah, out it goes. A Tamiya engine was built up and painted. The cylinders were sprayed with aluminum lacquer, followed by black Tamiya panel liner. The crankcase was painted and detailed. Once again, building the engine was the easy part. Fitting onto the front of the fuselage was another matter. I was lucky in that the diameters of the Otaki and Tamiya cowls were almost identical, so only a little plastic surgery was required. I started by cutting away the kit cowl flaps, and that allowed me to use the entire Tamiya cowl unit. But this required me to graft some plastic at the front of the kit fuselage. I took my time to shape and blend the plastic with several grades of sanding sticks. I used some Mr. Surfacer to even things out, and I even used a little super glue to make it solid. And voila! That's practically factory. This was worth the effort because I now had a solid wall to support the replacement engine, and the engine would be set at the correct depth. Once the engine was mounted, I bent the lead ignition wires, I installed the cowl, and I masked the cowl opening. Turning now to the wings. I like to add machine gun barrels because if I don't, I just end up with big gaping holes in the wings. And that's just boring. How do I do it? Well, I get the metal tubes from these here syringe ends, and I have various sizes of them. I have a very precise method to remove the metal tube from the plastic sleeve. It's almost surgical. Once the metal gun tube is freed, I use some scrap styrene to mount the barrels, always watching out to keep them from touching any part of the gun holes. It's a small detail, but it's a very easy thing and a very cheap thing to do. I try to do something new for every build. This time I wanted to add rivets to the wings and fuselage using the AK rivet wheel. I found a diagram of the Corsair with rivet patterns. I then used a ruler and a calculator to transcribe the spacing between the rivet lines. I marked the spacings on a piece of Tamiya tape, and this was then placed on the model to mark out the lines. Using a variety of straight edges, I drew the lines using a sharpened mechanical pencil. At first, I was hesitant to roll the riveter across the model without a guide, but I needn't have worried. It's very easy to stay on the pencil lines and apply the right amount of pressure. To be honest, it took way more time to measure and draw the lines than it did to actually apply the rivets onto them. As you can imagine, adding rivets to the fuselage was a bit trickier. Marking out the spaces between the lines was similar to what I did on the wings. And this time I used 3M tape to help me draw straight lines. And full disclosure, I messed this up a couple of times, but each time it was easily corrected with an eraser. So long as I took my time, the riveting was easy, and before long I had it all done. After all the rivets were punched, I sanded the wings and fuselage with 1000 grit paper. Sanding flattens the surface surrounding the punched rivets. The wingtip lights on Corsairs consisted of a colored bulb installed into the wing and a clear cover. This can be replicated easily using UV curable resin. First, I made the bulbs by shaping some styrene rod and painting them with clear red and clear green. I drilled holes into the wingtips, and I inserted these rods until the bulb part was just sticking out. I then dabbed some of the clear resin onto the bulb, being careful not to get it onto the wing surface. I then cured this first bit of resin with UV light. It only takes a couple minutes. I then kept adding resin to the wingtip and curing it each time. I did this until I had a fairly sizable ball of clear resin on each wingtip. Then I shaped these resin balls into proper shape using files and then sanding sticks, and then I finally polished them out. I have to say, this is the easiest way to make clear light covers, and it only takes a few minutes. Now the model is ready for paint, and I wanted to try something a little different. Something a little Central American. I always wanted to paint the Salvadoran Corsair because of its unique camouflage. El Salvador got their Corsairs a little late in the game, and they actually used some of them in combat for 4 days. In any case, they sure knew how to paint them. I'll do the camouflage Corsair now, but I'm pretty sure I'll go back and try the gray one sometime soon. Gallery sent me their Mobius airbrush to test, and they wanted to challenge me to use it to paint a tight camouflage pattern. Freehand, of course. So let's talk about that for a second. When it comes to camouflage patterns on airplanes, there are 2 ways this was done on the real thing. One method was to stick paint masks on the airplane and paint over them. This was called hard edge because, well, the colors have a clean, hard edge to them. The other way was to get someone with a paint gun to apply the colors without any masking. This is called soft edge because, due to the nature of how paint sprays, the edges of the colors are less defined. And this was probably the way it was done on these El Salvador Corsairs. There are a few ways to mimic soft edge, but none of them come close to using the airbrush and just freehand the colors without any masking. I knew the 0.2 millimeter needle size and air bleed valve would make this easier, but every airbrush is just a little different. I'll tell you what I did in terms of mixes and pressure, but I guarantee you'll have to tweak it to make it work for your airbrush and the environment in which you paint. For this model, I used Tamiya acrylics, and I started by turning the pressure way down to 10 psi and using a mix of 3 parts thinner to 1 part paint. And I sprayed real close to the surface. This did give me some fine lines, which I then started to apply to the model. But then I noticed there was a strange hazy overspray when I started painting the next color. So I made a few more adjustments to the thinner to paint ratio, and I found that 2 parts thinner to 1 part paint worked much better, especially when I played around with the bleed valve on the airbrush. I got nice tight lines and 0 overspray. Now for the colors, and well, there are conflicting references out there. Some say there was a tan and 2 greens, others say 1 tan and 3 greens. I believe both theories can be true at the same time. This is because those planes were repainted in service. I just went with David Unk's suggestions in his excellent Salvador Corsair article over at Hyperscale. I came up with my own Tamiya mixes to match these colors, and I'll have a list of those paints I used as well as mixing ratios in the video description. As for the pattern, well, I tried my best to use some photos and drawings. I think I captured the essence of a Salvadoran Corsair, but I'm confident this is not a perfect rendition of the camo pattern. What worked for me was to start the line away from the edge and then slowly draw that line towards the edge of the next color. I also kept the airbrush in motion to avoid pooling, and I slowly built out the color while building up the contour of each pattern. The only place I used a mask was the demarcation line between the camouflage and the gray underbody color, and I did this out of fear of overspray. But if I were to do it again, I'd just spray the camouflage first and then freehand the gray afterwards. After painting, I prepared the landing gear and all the final assembly bits. I kept it simple by using the kit's landing gear, but I dressed up the main gear by adding some brake lines and some springs, and I grafted a Tamiya wheel onto the tail gear and drilled out some holes to mimic what's on the real Corsair. And there you have it. The Franken Corsair is alive. It was a lot of fun combining the decades-old rescue kit with cast-off Corsair bits from Tamiya, Hasegawa, Hobbycraft, and God knows whatever else I collected over the years. I think my riveting experiment was a success. It certainly added a lot of visual interest to the model. I definitely learned a lot by trying it, and I'll be doing it in future builds. Lastly, painting a camouflage freehand was a bit of a challenge, but tinkering with the mixes and pressures made this a lot easier. Thanks again to Gallery for sending me the airbrush. If you want a Mobius or any other Gallery airbrush and you want to save some money, you could order directly from them using my discount code. I'll also have links to Gallery in the video description. So let me know in the comments, do you keep your spares from your kit builds? Have you ever gone back and actually used them on another project? Or like me, were you just stockpiling? Thanks for watching. I really appreciate your support. Until next time, keep building, keep trying new things. It's what makes this hobby fun.